Well, this is such an extraordinary day in every way. Again, Joe, it's good to see you. Very good to see you. And it's a great day of not only great festivity, but it's one of the deepest days of faith for us. And I have to say that, obviously, Easter too, but on this day, this draws people from the deepest part of their faith in God, given to us in the Son of God, Jesus Christ. And I think for the most part, most of us have an easier time relating to Jesus than even God our Father because of his humanity and because he walked among us and shared in our life. I'm going to read, I read from the third Mass. There are 4 Masses for the Feast of Christmas. There's a Vigil Mass in the late afternoon, 5, 6, 7. There is the Midnight Mass, or around that time of night. Then there's a Mass at dawn, and that's, usually the first Mass, 6 in the morning, 7 in the morning. But I chose the Mass of the day, but I mistakenly read the opening from the Mass at dawn. But it's quite nice, But listen to this one for the Mass of the day. O God, who wonderfully created the dignity of human nature and still more wonderfully restored it. And to unpack that, this connects with the first chapter, second chapter, or the early chapters of Genesis and the Adam and Eve story. And it's a story. I'm just not so sure there are talking serpents and all, but it's a story trying to capture this. As it says in the first chapter, God made us in his image and likeness. All was good. But something happened as he placed this man and woman in the garden and gave them this decree. You can eat anything from this whole garden. Every tree is yours except one. This one in the center of the garden. Do not eat of this tree. And so the story is a story of temptation and disobedience. And the serpent, Satan, evil, the devil comes and tempts Eve. She eats the apple. She gives it to Adam. Their eyes are open. They realize they're naked. They hide from God. It's a story of a fall from grace. This gift of beautiful humanity got scarred and broken on that day. This is what we call original sin. And it's our way of dealing with something that's hard to deal with. Why is there sin in the world? Why is there so much darkness? Every day I picked up the paper this week or watched the news, there's a murder somewhere. And I suppose we get obsessed with looking at the darkness. There's wars going on right now that are unspeakable wars. And even worse than anything in the Holy Land is Sudan in Africa. It's horrific what's happening to people, the exile they're forced into. It is ugly, it is dark, and it's in the world. But we celebrate in this that the dignity of human nature that was wonderfully created by God, and we lost it through disobedience and through the darkness, has still more wonderfully been restored. And we grant us, Lord, that we may share in the divinity of Christ, who humbled himself to share in our humanity, and that's the mystery of Christmas. The scriptures put it this way, as I said in the beginning, that God chose to come among us as one of us, that he emptied himself of his godliness. He didn't come down in power, he came down in vulnerability. He came down as an infant. What is more vulnerable than a baby? And 30 years later, 33 years later, that's what happened to him. He allowed vulnerability to take him into death, and what a horrific death it was. But I believe, and it's been my greatest reflection this year that keeps hitting me in the face, that the reason that cross is so important and connects with this humanity of Jesus is that if the darkness of sin and the ugliness of human behavior could do that, the broken humanity that could hate like that could condemn and reject like that, the spit on his face, the nakedness that he endured on the cross, everything, and he could still speak the words, Father, forgive them all, they know not what they do. Now that's divinity. That's the presence of God in him. So profound that even in the midst of hatred, murderous hate, he could love and he can forgive. And that's what restores our humanity. That's what brings the divinity into us and allows us to taste God, to touch God, or better put, for God to touch us. That's what we share in this Christmas. And we, for 4 weeks, kept embracing the light of the Advent wreath, lighting one candle after another for 4 weeks, because we want this light to touch us so profoundly that we'll never be perfect on earth. We're sinners, we're not perfect, we're human, but we have a taste of divinity, and it's amazing how much we can love. It's amazing how much we can give. It's amazing how much Christ can come through our words and our actions and make a better world. And that's what we embrace today on this feast of Christmas. My prayer for you all is that in your families, and I love this image that the church gives us, that every household is a little church. And this parish is a gathering of all those little churches. There's hundreds of churches in this church. And it's your families that can gather in prayer, that can open yourselves to Christ, the Word of God, and become more like Christ each day. And part of the beauty of this year, we are in the midst of our 100th anniversary year. That means for 100 years, since 1924, at multiple masses, this community of churches gathered together as one church. And we've been doing this Christmas for 100 years. 100 years. That's an enormous celebration of faith. That's an enormous population of people that have been blessed by Christ and that have been able to go out into the world and give Christ to the world. I find that extraordinary. I find that overwhelming. And so we gather once again in the 100th year to celebrate the birth of Christ, which happened, not today, but over 2,000 years ago. But we celebrate it again today so that we can taste it, experience it, and it can fill us with the incarnational joy and power and glory that God has given to us through His Son. Please stand.